Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, September 29th, 2022. Hurricane Ian ravaging Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis calling it a 500-year flood event and thanking President Joe Biden for the disaster declarations so far, which frees up federal money to help in the rescue and the recovery. And the governor suggesting more counties in Florida will need those declarations. President Biden going to FEMA headquarters in Washington, getting an update on the response to Hurricane Ian and promising help is on the way, continuing on the way to Florida, and saying that Ian could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. Also today, the U.S. Senate passing a short-term federal government funding bill, sending it to the House, which plans to bring it up and pass it on Friday. And if it's signed into law before Friday midnight heading into Saturday, that's the deadline to avoid a government shutdown. The new director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Colette, testifying for the first time before Congress. This after the previous director resigned amid scandals about prison staff sexually abusing inmates and COVID-19 spreading unchecked through the prison population. We'll hear some of that testimony and talk about it with Associated Press Justice reporter Michael Sisak. And Vice President Kamala Harris visits the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. And now to Hurricane Ian making its way across Florida, then expected to go up the Atlantic seaboard. Governors in states from Georgia to Virginia already declaring states of emergency. Associated Press reporting from Punta Gorda, Florida. Rescue crews waded through flooded streets and used boats Thursday in a scramble to save people trapped after Hurricane Ian destroyed a cross-section of Florida and brought torrential rains that continued to fall. The destruction began to come into focus a day after Ian made landfall in Florida as one of the strongest hurricanes ever to hit the United States. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis started his day with a news conference in the capital city, Tallahassee.
Right now, if you look in central Florida, you're looking at potential major flooding in Orange and Seminole counties, St. Johns River, all the way up potentially into northeast Florida and Jacksonville. The amount of water that's been rising and will likely continue to rise today, even as the storm is passing, is basically a 500-year flood event. And I know Seminole County has done evacuations. I know they've opened shelters, but we're going to see a lot of images about the destruction that was done in Southwest Florida, and obviously we have massive assets there. But people should just understand this storm is having broad impacts across the state, and some of the flooding you're going to see in areas hundreds of miles from where this made landfall are going to set records, and that's going to obviously be things that that will need to be responded to. We have, of course, massive amounts of food and water in the area. We're going to have probably close to 300 truckloads of food and water in the area today. Fortunately, most of our school districts will be able to reopen on Friday or Monday. Lee County is in a very difficult situation, Charlotte, so we're going to work with them and see when they can get back on their feet. But the damage there has been just so extensive that it's a very difficult situation. We have received a major disaster declaration for 9 counties, but we do expect more. I just spoke with the president this morning. He offered support. I told him thanks for this, but because the storm has moved inland and caused a lot of potential damage in the center part of our state, that we were going to be asking for those counties to be expanded and included there. But for now, we have approval for Charlotte, Collier, DeSoto, Hardy, Hillsborough, Lee, Manatee, Pinellas, and Sarasota. That will allow individual Floridians to seek individual assistance from FEMA. And that will be something that, as you have people that have been displaced due to the catastrophic impacts of Hurricane Ian, that's going to be something that's going to be necessary. We have been granted 100% federal assistance, Category A and B, up front for 30 days to ensure we can quickly move forward into this response and recovery situation.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at the Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee, Florida, early this morning. He then went around the state surveying the damage and holding many more news conferences. The Federal Emergency Management Agency Administrator Deanne Criswell telling CNN this morning that the hurricane caused the most damage, as the governor said, in Lee County, south of Tampa on Florida's Gulf Coast. Deanne Criswell saying, "My heart is just breaking for the people in these communities right now because they have experienced absolutely catastrophic impacts from this. There's parts of this community that have just been devastated." Dean Criswell joining President Biden today at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Also there, the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and President Biden getting a briefing and then speaking to reporters about the federal response.
It made landfall yesterday, and it is still moving across the state today. This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. The numbers are still unclear, but we're hearing early reports of what may be substantial loss of life. And parenthetically, I should note I've spoken with the governors and the mayors and the commissioners. I've been on the phone with the governor this morning. I spoke with the commissioners and mayors, and they are worried, but every one of them are telling me what an incredible job is being done to save their cities, their towns, their counties, their ports, their bridges, etc. And in the face of serious danger, search and rescue operations got underway before dawn this morning for people stranded and who are in desperate shape. Water rescue is critical. Coast Guard deployed 16 rescue helicopters, 6 fixed-wing aircraft, and 18 rescue boats and crews. That's just one element of the many federal search and rescue teams that the pre-staged in Florida. And the governor talked about how impressed he was with what the Coast Guard is doing this morning. These are dangerous missions, and I'm grateful for the brave women and men in federal, state, and local governments working as one team, risking their lives to save others. And we're going to learn a lot more in the coming hours. But we know many families are hurting. Many are hurting today. And our entire country hurts with them because it's been all over the country. We've seen so many crises. But in Florida today is the epicenter. We're continuing to see deadly rainfall, catastrophic storm surges, roads and homes flooded. We're seeing millions of people without power and thousands hunkered down in schools and community centers. They're wondering what's going to be left. What's going to be left when they get to go home, quote unquote home, or even if they have a home to go to. Some of the folks have been through this before, but that doesn't make it any easier. Actually makes the anxiety even higher in my view. My message to the people of Florida and to the country is at times like this, America comes together. We're going to pull together as one team, as one America. First thing this morning is when I talked to Governor DeSantis and again offered the fullest federal support. Earlier this week, I approved his request for the pre-landfall emergency declaration to provide direct federal assistance to the state for emergency protective measures to save lives, including search and rescue and shelter and food. Earlier this morning, I approved the governor's most recent request for the expedited major disaster declaration. That means the federal government will cover 100% of the cost to clear debris and for all the costs that the state has to engage in and expend to save lives. The federal government will also cover a majority of the cost of rebuilding public buildings like schools and state fire stations. And folks in Florida who have destroyed or damaged homes, you don't have enough insurance. It means the federal government will provide individual assistance of $37,900 for home repairs, another $37,900 for lost property, for everything from automobile to a lost wedding ring. That's what we mean by lost property. I've also spoken with mayors across the state, both Republican and Democrat, and I've told them the same thing. We are here. Whether you need, and whatever you need, I indicated to call me directly at the White House. They know how to do that. We're going to do everything we can to provide whatever they need.
President Joe Biden at FEMA headquarters in Washington. Some early cost estimates on Hurricane Ian. This from an article at the business site Quartz. They write it could be the most costliest in U.S. history. The massive storm tearing through parts of Florida at 150 miles per hour is poised to cause between $30 billion and $60 billion worth of damages and economic losses. Chuck Watson of NK Research estimates. After President Biden finished his remarks, a reporter asked him about his relationship with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is a Republican and has been talked about as a possible presidential candidate in 2024.
How would you describe your relationship and your conversation with Governor DeSantis?
It's totally irrelevant, but I'll answer it, okay? In fact, very fine. He complimented me. He thanked me for the immediate response we had. He told me how much he appreciated it, said he was extremely happy with what was going on. This is not about whether anything having to do with our disagreements politically. This is about saving people's lives, homes, and businesses. That's what this is about. And so I've talked to him 4 or 5 times already. And it's not a matter of my disagreements with him on other items.
President Joe Biden, Democrat, at FEMA headquarters in Washington. National Hurricane Center said that the intensity of Ian dropped from hurricane to tropical storm as it passed over Florida, but is now back to hurricane strength and is expected to make a second landfall in South Carolina on Friday. Disaster assistance, part of the short-term federal government funding bill that passed the Senate today, in addition to preventing a government shutdown October 1st, which is the start of the new fiscal year, through December 16th. Ahead of the vote, Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat from Vermont, Appropriations Committee Chair on the Senate floor.
Now, the continuing resolution we're about to consider contains $18.8 billion for the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund. It would bring available resources in the fund to approximately $35 billion to respond to these and other disasters. We likely aren't going to know the extent of the damage for several days. Certainly every time you watch the news, you hear of more damage. But I remind my colleagues that we are the United States of America. And I'm ready to work with my colleagues to respond with what is needed. I don't care whether a state is represented by Democrats or Republicans. You're part of the United States of America. And as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I'll work with you during the months ahead to get the funds you need. Now, that's it. I'm glad that we've reached agreement to fund the federal government through December 16th. And I want to thank my good friend, Vice Chairman Shelby, for working on this. But I especially want to thank Leaders Schumer and McConnell for their work and cooperation in reaching this point. They both understand the need to go forward.
Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat from Vermont, on the Senate floor. The Senate passed this short-term federal government funding bill 72-25, sending it over to the U.S. House. 22 Senate Republicans joining all Democrats in voting yes to avoid the government shutdown, and 25 Republicans voting no. 3 Republican senators did not vote, Senators Lee, Portman, and Rubio. One of the no votes was Mike Braun, Republican from Indiana. He spoke before the vote.
When they look at our Capitol, they see a twisted knot of lobbyists, corporate interests, and a mountain of debt that just gets higher and higher. We now spend over $1 trillion more each year than we take in. And recently, that's gone up to $1.5 trillion. To normalize that just does not make sense. We are here twiddling our thumbs while our kids and grandkids' future go up in smoke. Every American family is paying for our failures here. Congress as a whole, and particularly this body, seem to have no interest in turning this big ship away from the rocks.
Senator Mike Brown, Republican from Indiana, on the Senate floor. Again, the Senate vote today on the short-term government funding bill 72-25. It heads over to the House. The bill also includes money for Jackson, Mississippi to address its municipal water crisis, and money for Ukraine to continue its war against Russia's invasion. The House is scheduled to take it up on Friday, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage here on C-SPAN Radio in addition to C-SPAN Television. You can also follow it on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app and listen on your smart device. Say, play C-SPAN Radio. That's Friday, live, 9 a.m. Wall Street today, the Dow falling 458, NASDAQ down 314, S&P down 78. A change in law to help ease the baby formula shortage in the United States may be coming soon. Both the House and Senate passing bills to temporarily lift the 13% tariff on importing base powder that's used to make the baby formula. The Senate passed it by unanimous consent, which means no senator objected, and the House passed it by voice vote. Before the House vote, Congresswoman Susan DelBene, Democrat from Washington, spoke. She's a member of the Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee.
Nationally, 61% of formula shelves are still empty. In my home state of Washington, it's been hit harder, with 67% of formula shelves empty. While that's an improvement from the May nationwide high of 86%, we in Congress have an obligation to do more. Part of the improvement we've seen over the last few months can be attributed to legislation that I led with Chairman Blumenauer, Ranking Member Adrian Smith, and my Ways and Means colleagues back in July that lifted tariffs on imported baby formula. This chamber and the Senate passed the legislation with overwhelming bipartisan support. There are still more actions, though, that Congress can take to support families, and that's what this legislation that we will vote on today will do. Consider what this legislation would mean to parents. Jessie is a mom in my district and has been struggling to find formula for her 7-month-old daughter, Amara. She is not one to ask for help often, but when she was running low on her last can, Jessie joined a local social media group where other parents would post where they saw formula on the shelves, and she downloaded an app that would notify her when more cans were available and made backup plans for donated breast milk if it came to that. Jessie was able to find formula in the end, but realizes that she is one of the lucky parents that had the means and the network to support her daughter. Not all parents have these resources. The Bulk Infant Formula to Retail Shelves Act would boost domestic baby formula production and get more product on our shelves. It would do so by lifting tariffs through the end of the year on safe imported base powder. This is a key component filled with essential proteins, fats, and carbohydrates that are mixed with other nutrients and ingredients to make the formula that parents buy on store shelves or online.
Congresswoman Susan DelBene on the Senate floor, Democrat from Washington State, also speaking before the vote. Congressman Adrian Smith, Republican from Nebraska, ranking member on the Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee.
I rise today in support of the Bulk Infant Formula to Retail Shelves Act. I appreciate my colleague Susan DelBene for working together to help lead this bipartisan effort to further address our nation's ongoing infant formula shortage. It's very disappointing that the administration knew of this looming shortage for months, actually, before they developed a strategy. And so here we are, 9 months into the crisis, and as yet, as of August, 30% of our nation's baby formula was out of stock nationally for 6 weeks in a row. This is simply unacceptable. I'm glad that we can work together to correct this. We must use every tool available to increase domestic manufacturing, including responsibly importing FDA-approved base powder used to manufacture formula when needed. The Bulk Infant Formula to Retail Shelves Act builds on the bipartisan work done in the Formula Act and supports domestic manufacturing by allowing formula-based powder to be imported duty-free through the end of the year.
Congressman Adrian Smith, Republican from Nebraska, on the House floor. Again, the House did pass this bill by voice vote. Senate passed the identical bill by unanimous consent. Food and Drug Administration in the past week releasing a report on the baby formula shortage, blaming systemic vulnerabilities at the FDA as it investigated contaminated baby formula earlier this year, and that led to the shutdown of a major manufacturing plant. The report recommends, as CNN writes, the FDA needs more modern technology, more staff, training, and equipment, updated emergency response systems that can handle more than one incident at a time, more scientific knowledge about the Chronobacter bacteria, which is found in infant formula, and a better understanding of the formula industry. This is expected to be the House's last week in session before the November elections. The Senate does plan to come back mid-October, according to the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, to work on the defense authorization bill, but not hold votes until after the elections. House Republicans today holding a rally and news conference on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. The Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy promoting a series of proposals that he recently released called A Commitment to America.
The policies that create a plan to put us on a new track. It's a plan for an economy that is strong, where you can fill up your tank and feed your families, where paychecks grow, not shrink. A plan for a nation that is safe, where communities are protected, law enforcement is respected, and criminals are prosecuted. It's a plan for a future that is built on freedom, where children come first and are taught to dream big. A plan for government that is accountable, where politicians don't get special treatment and Americans get answers. The truth is, we simply cannot afford 2 more years of Democrat control. It is our commitment to the American public, a plan for a new direction to make sure that the next century is the American century.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, on the U.S. Capitol steps, part of a rally and news conference with other House Republicans today. Inside the U.S. Capitol, the House Democratic Caucus Chair, Hakeem Jeffries of New York, spoke at a news conference, asked about the issues that his party will be highlighting in the weeks leading up to the elections.
We have an incredible track record of accomplishment: the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, gun safety legislation for the first time in 30 years, the Inflation Reduction Act, where we've been able to act in a decisive way in terms of addressing the climate crisis, put our planet on a sustainable path forward, lower energy costs, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, lower health care costs, and drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs for millions of Americans. That's a tremendous track record of accomplishment that proves the point that when we say we're going to put people over politics and fight to lower costs, for better paying jobs, and for safer communities, we mean it, because we've done it, and we're going to continue to do it. At the same time, whatever decisions the American people have to make over the next few weeks are not a referendum, it's a choice. It's a choice between Democrats who are putting people over politics and extreme MAGA Republicans. They are extreme when it comes to reproductive freedom. We believe in it, they don't. They want to criminalize abortion care and impose a nationwide ban. That's what the so-called commitment to America is all about. A nationwide ban on abortion care. We believe, as Democrats, in Social Security and in being there for older Americans so they can retire with grace and dignity. Extreme MAGA Republicans want to end Social Security in 5 years. We actually believe in democracy. Chairman Benny Thompson, Vice Chair Liz Cheney, Pete Aguilar, all of the members of the January 6th committee have done a phenomenal job of crystallizing the stakes with respect to American democracy and its fragile nature. Extreme MAGA Republicans apparently do not believe in democracy anymore.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the House Democratic Caucus Chair at a news conference today in the U.S. Capitol building. Standing beside him was Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California. In addition to being a member of that House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol, he is the Democratic Caucus Vice Chair, often joins the chair at the news conferences. Well, Pete Aguilar today was asked about somebody who is testifying before the committee behind closed doors, as they've done the depositions, Ginny Thomas, conservative activist and wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
Put it back.
Question for the Vice Chair. We saw Ginny Thomas walk into a deposition room a short time ago. What does the committee hope to learn from her, and do you expect any of that testimony to be in this next hearing?
I'm not going to speak to the contents of the next hearing. I saw the video as well. I generally don't speak to witnesses that come before the committee, but I'll say, broadly that the committee has been very clear that we'd like to hear from Ginny Thomas. Her discussions and coordination and text messages to Mark Meadows, as well as specifically to John Eastman. John Eastman, for everyone at home, is the same individual who came up with this idea and scheme that a federal judge has ruled was likely illegal, and conspired to delay the proceedings here and has criminal exposure. She had conversations and was messaging John Eastman. We want to ask questions about that. We think that that's fair, and we plan to ask those questions of her. I can't speak to the answers or how the committee will proceed after that, but we'll, like many individuals who's come before us, we'll hear the testimony, we'll continue the investigation, we'll continue having conversations, and when it's relevant, we'll present it to the public.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol at a news conference today. The Hill reports that the interview with Ginny Thomas caps months-long effort by the committee to speak with the conservative activist who reportedly exchanged emails with John Eastman, the lawyer who drafted memos for the Trump campaign, outlining how then Vice President Mike Pence could keep then President Trump in power, as well as with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN. Powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today. You can get Washington Today as a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts or on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app. The new director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Colette Peters, on the job for just a few months, testifying for the first time today before Congress. It was the Senate Judiciary Committee holding the hearing. She was brought in to deal with, as a Reuters article describes it, a tumultuous tenure for the Bureau's outgoing director, Michael Carvajal, who faced backlash from prison staff over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a scathing investigative report from the Associated Press, which found that more than 100 BOP workers had been arrested, convicted, or sentenced for crimes since 2019. Today, she promised reform.
We have always known that running safe and secure prisons is the foundation of our work. And now we know that treating those in our care and custody with the principles of normalcy and humanity improves working conditions for our employees and improves public safety. That type of environment better prepares us to achieve both parts of our mission, including the second part, to ensure people reenter society as productive citizens. Our job is to make good neighbors, not good inmates. And this is a historic time to be a part of corrections. When I began my career 30 years ago, it was a forgotten part of the public safety system. As evidenced by this hearing today and other actions taken by Congress and the public's expectations around conditions of confinement and good public safety outcomes, that is no longer the case. We are no longer forgotten. I am committed to ensuring that Bureau employees remain guided by our core values of respect, integrity, courage, and correctional excellence. Research and my own personal experience tells me we can be more assured of this expectation if we are focused on our correctional employees' wellness. They are mission critical and they are our everything.
Colette Peters, Director, Federal Bureau of Prisons, part of her opening statement before the Senate Judiciary Committee today. She's a former director of the Oregon Department of Corrections. Ahead of today's hearing, there was this article in the New York Times. The Justice Department is finalizing long-awaited plans to overhaul the troubled Federal Bureau of Prisons, which includes a recommendation to increase sentences for prison employees found guilty of sexual abuse against inmates, according to people familiar with the situation. That from the New York Times. Here's a question about that today from Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California.
Recently, 5 BOP employees who worked at FCI Dublin, including the former warden of the facility, were arrested on charges of sexually abusing women who were incarcerated in that facility. And Senator Grassley just spoke about that. Now, this is not an isolated incident. There are regular reports of sexual abuse and harassment of people who are housed in BOP facilities. According to an investigation by the Associated Press in 2020, there were 422 complaints that BOP staff had sexually abused inmates across BOP's system of 122 prisons. Of those claims, 290 are still being investigated. I just want to say that this is unacceptable, and more must be done to ensure this abuse does not continue. So I would like to know, what is BOP doing to address the rampant sexual misconduct taking place in some federal prison facilities?
Thank you, Senator. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to make your acquaintance, and we couldn't agree more. That behavior is egregious. It shall not be tolerated. When you are in our care and custody, you have every right to feel safe and to be safe. And so I take this very seriously. As the former Inspector General of Oregon, I work to help prosecute many of these cases. I will absolutely continue with that philosophy. The Bureau will continue to work with law enforcement to ensure that those individuals get prosecuted. We've done numerous things. As I said, Senator, I visited Dublin personally within my first month on the job. I spent the entire day talking to those in our care and custody and also talking to our employees. And what we have done, even specifically at that institution and at some of our other institutions, is we're beginning with a cultural assessment. What is happening inside the institutions where people didn't feel comfortable coming forward?
Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Colette Peters, questioned by Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California, today's Judiciary Committee hearing. Another member of the committee, Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, as he started his Q&A period with that witness, talking about tougher punishments. But he says not only for staff at the prisons found guilty, but for criminals as well.
I find myself a bit mystified by the comments that Senator Durbin made earlier. He talked about seeking stiffer penalties for prisoner abuse cases. Of course, no prisoner should be abused, and if a prison guard is found guilty of doing so after being afforded due process of law, I'd favor them facing stiff penalties. One of the main reasons we oppose stiff penalties, of course, is because it has a deterrent effect. And Senator Durbin and many of the other Democrats in this committee, like Senator Booker, seem to have a very selective view of when deterrence comes into play. Just yesterday, in fact, Senator Durbin blocked bills on the floor that would impose stiffer penalties for fentanyl, which is poisoning children all across America. Bills that I offered, bills that Senator Grassley offered. Senator Booker has repeatedly offered or blocked my legislation that would permanently schedule fentanyl under the Controlled Substance Act. So our Democratic friends seem to have a very curious and selective view of when stiff penalties will have an actual deterrent effect.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas. Associated Press reporter Michael Sisak was at today's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing with the new director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Colette Peters, and he joins us now by phone. Thank you so much. First testimony before Congress by the director, who was brought in to correct some problems in the federal prison system. What stood out to you in the senator's questions and her answers?
Thanks for having me on. Yes, this was Colette Peters' first appearance as the Bureau of Prisons director before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And what stood out was the tone and the level of cooperation that she promised. She said she welcomed oversight. She said she welcomed transparency, and that she was committed to correcting the problems that have been exposed by our reporting, by congressional investigations, including staffing deficiencies, misconduct by employees, sexual abuse, and the like. She said that she has just 2 months on the job, but she's developing plans to tackle those issues and to restructure the agency in a way that will mitigate misconduct and allow them to really focus on the well-being of staff and on inmates so that they are returned to society, inmates, as productive people, not people who have been, for lack of a better term, beaten down by the system.
How long-standing are some of these problems that have been uncovered?
some of the problems in the agency go back years, decades even. Certainly, some of the staffing woes have been exacerbated by the pandemic. There's a practice in the Bureau of Prisons known as augmentation, which Director Peters today said should only be used in an emergency situation. And what that is when other prison workers, not people who are full-time assigned as correctional officers, are pulled into duty as correctional officers. These are cooks, these are nurses, these are teachers, these are counselors. These are people who are pulled away from their day jobs in the prison setting to guard inmates, to walk the beat, so to speak, to guard a post. And she says that has become a de facto way of filling thousands and thousands of vacancies. And what that's doing is having a downstream effect on people having their paperwork filled out, getting classes, and again, getting ready to return to society in a way that will help them with the rest of their lives.
You report on a bipartisan proposed reform bill from some senators. John Ossoff, a Democrat, Mike Braun, a Republican, Dick Durbin, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, a Democrat. At the same time, Republicans in Congress have made fighting violent crime a key part of their campaign agenda. What's the chance of a bipartisan bill passing?
If you talk to the senators that are backing the bill, and there's a companion bill in the House, they're optimistic. They have support from a broad coalition of groups from all sorts of parts of the stakeholder community and from the political spectrum. This bill that would make some enhancements to oversight and transparency at the Bureau of Prisons includes the creation of an ombudsman position and requirements that the Inspector General at the Justice Department would conduct inspections of all 122 federal prison facilities and create sort of a scorecard, a grading system. That's supported by not only the Correctional Officers Union, but also a group that advocates for inmates. It's supported by conservative groups. So it seems like there may be a momentum there to pass a bipartisan bill, much as there was in the Trump administration when the First Step Act was passed. That was the law that would allow people to gain credits while in custody in prison, federal prison, and perhaps be released early with good conduct and that sort of thing. These senators backing this bill said there may be this similar momentum for this proposal.
We're talking with Associated Press reporter Michael Sisak. And finally, how large is the federal prison system compared to the prison system overall in the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. People know state prisons, they might know a local jail. The federal prison system operates somewhat in the shadows. There's not a program on CBS primetime about the Bureau of Prisons the way there is about the FBI. But there are 122 federal prisons across the country. There are in many communities, many states, they have about 150,000 inmates and about 35,000 staff. So this is a sizable operation. In fact, by some of those metrics, by the budget numbers of about $8 billion, it's the largest component of the Justice Department. And they operate facilities, jails in New York City and in Los Angeles and big cities where people who are accused of white-collar crimes and also violent crimes are held. And then you have big penitentiaries like in Florence, Colorado, for instance, big complexes in Coleman, Florida, where all sorts of different types of people who have been convicted of crimes are held. So this is a big operation.
Michael Sisak is an Associated Press reporter covering crime, the courts, and prisons. Find his stories at apnews.com, and on Twitter, he's at Mike Sisak. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And C-SPAN cameras covered today's hearing, Senate Judiciary Committee, with the new head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. There was also a second panel with stakeholders in that system. You can find the full video at our video library at cspan.org. This is Washington Today. Vice President Kamala Harris continuing her trip to Asia today with a visit to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. Reuters reports that Vice President Harris said North Korea is a country with a brutal dictatorship, an illegal arms program, and rampant human rights violations, issuing unusually strong criticism during a visit to the inter-Korean border on Thursday. That from Reuters. Here's the Vice President.
Here you see at the DMZ, U.S. soldiers serving shoulder to shoulder with soldiers from the Republic of Korea. They are training together. They are committed to working in solidarity around a shared purpose and goal, which is to maintain the security and the stability of this region of the world. I cannot state enough that the commitment of the United States to the defense of the Republic of Korea is ironclad, and that we will do everything in our power to ensure that it has meaning in every way that the words suggest.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the DMZ. After her stop there, North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles, the third such launch in 5 days. The U.S. State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel questioned about it during a teleconference with reporters.
Let's go to the line of Jenny Handler with CNN.
Hi, thanks, Vedant. I wanted to ask about the North Korean missile launches. Does the U.S. have any assessment of that, and do you see it as extra provocative given that Vice President Harris was just in the DMZ and in the region? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Jenny. So the United States condemns the DPRK's multiple ballistic missile launches this morning, 2 today and 3 earlier this week. These launches are a clear violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions and demonstrate the threat the DPRK poses to the region as well as the international community. We remain deeply committed to a diplomatic approach with the DPRK and call on the DPRK to engage in dialogue. I'll also note that our commitment to the defense of the Republic of Korea and Japan, 2 of our key allies in the region, remains ironclad.
Vedant Patel, State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson, a teleconference today with reporters. On Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this from CNN, Russia will on Friday begin formally annexing up to 18% of Ukrainian territory, with President Vladimir Putin expected to host a ceremony in the Kremlin to declare 4 occupied Ukrainian territories part of Russia. The announcements come after people in those 4 occupied areas of Ukraine supposedly voted in huge numbers in favor of joining Russia in 5-day polls that were illegal under international law and dismissed by Kyiv and the West as a sham. That from CNN. On Capitol Hill today in Washington, 2 senators, 1 Democratic, 1 Republican, introducing a bill in response to the referendum and the annexation. Here is Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut.
Senator Graham and I are introducing today legislation that would very simply immediately require cutting off economic and military aid to any country that recognizes Vladimir Putin's illegal annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine, which he has planned imminently to accomplish. It is unlawful under international law. It is unjustified. Vladimir Putin is pushing the countries that have backed Ukraine to somehow moderate what they're doing, and it won't work. This legislation we are offering in 2 forms, as a standalone bill and also as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. And as you know, imminently, probably within the next 24 hours, Russia is set to go ahead with this annexation. And essentially what we're saying is any nation that aids and abets Vladimir Putin in this absolutely illegal action ought to be held responsible for its complicity. No economic aid, no military aid to any country that recognizes this annexation. It is a land grab, it's a steal, and it is another craven, brazen tactic by Vladimir Putin to test the West's support for Ukraine. And we are having none of it, nor should any other nation.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill, along with Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, introducing this bill with him. The 2 also sponsored another bill that would designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Also today, when it comes to Iran, the State Department announcing sanctions of companies in China, India, Hong Kong, and the United Arab Emirates, alleging they helped Iran evade oil export sanctions, all as the Biden administration still seeks to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get more of Washington's top stories sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.